Good morning and welcome to today's IGTV. Today I'm talking about parenting your ADHD teen. I work with a lot of parents who are really struggling with this and actually don't have half, not even a quarter of the correct information. They're not being told what they need to be told. And quite frankly, it's not okay with me. So today I'm going to go through a bunch of facts and data to help you better understand your teenager's ADHD brain and how to parent through that rather than against it. My name is Allie Payne. I am a certified life coach, certified relationship systems coach, one of only 70 people in Canada to hold both designations. I have ADHD myself, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I have been working with parents of teens for the last 16 years to help them end the emotional, baffling blow-ups, the painful disconnection and stressful silences to create relationships based on mutual trust and respect and genuine connection. And so much of that is about understanding the difference between an adult brain and a teen brain, let alone the differences between a neuronormal parent brain and an ADHD brain. So I'm going to jump in on this. Oh, also, I want to say I also raised a child. He's now an adult, incredible human being. My oldest son has ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. I knew he was different from the time he was about 18 months old, actually 6 months. He's not your average bear. He's incredible. He's incredible. That's all I can say about that. But I personally have experience with this, not only having ADHD myself, and being raised by parents who also had zero education or support or any information about this. And then raising a child myself who had ADHD and autism spectrum. So that makes it a little more complicated, but let's jump in, shall we? Everything I'm sharing with you today, again, is research-based and based on my own experience as well. So if this is helpful for you, I would love a follow here on Instagram or a subscribe if you're here on YouTube. This video will be on my profile, both on Instagram, YouTube, for forever. So if you're here live, thank you for joining me. And if you're worried if you're going to miss this, don't worry, it will be there. Okay. So I think it's really important to first say, what is ADHD? What is it? Because most parents don't understand it and are not given this information. I'm not saying you're a bad parent. No, I am not. I am saying you are not being effectively informed, which is not okay. The understanding, the misconception is that ADHD and its known traits are a choice of defiance. And I am here to tell you right now that that mindset and belief is not helping your relationship with your teen. It is not a choice. It is a neurodivergence in the brain. I'm choosing to see it as a choice of defiance or laziness or, if you wanted to concentrate and pay attention, you could. And if you just wanted to be better behaved and not act out all the time, you could. I need you to first and foremost start this conversation right here with your willingness to please park that absolutely unworkable belief. Park it just for now in this conversation, please. Because otherwise you won't get much out of this. Okay? It's like the common misconception that all mental health, well, if you just tried harder, if you just cheered up, you wouldn't be depressed. If you just stopped worrying, just calm down and stop worrying, you wouldn't be anxious. Okay, can we stop doing that about mental health? Okay? ADHD is okay. I'm going to keep going. I have a lot of notes to cover. I'm on a bit of a soapbox. I'm going to keep talking. Here we go. Okay. So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactive disorder, okay? In the DSM-5, which is the medical book of like documented, mental health disorders, etc., it is now officially known as ADHD, okay? Attention deficit hyperactive disorder. We are not calling it ADD anymore. It is officially known as ADHD, even though the hyperactivity part is only applicable to approximately 40% of those people diagnosed. So some 40% of those people diagnosed do not have the H, the hyperactivity. They have ADD, but medically it is now known. We're not calling it ADHD, ADD. We're just calling it ADHD, okay? So what essentially happens in the brain, okay, is the cerebellum. If you take your hand and you go down the back of the skull to where like there's that indent, right? The skull right there, okay? So right where your hand goes below the indent, that's where your cerebellum is. Your cerebellum is the neuron like nuclear center for our bodies, okay? 25% of the or more in the body of your neurons, like the firing, the telling, the message centering, all of the things happens in your cerebellum, right there at the back of, right where your brain stem, just after your brain stem comes in, okay? That's your cerebellum. Okay, now, stay with me here. If you're concentrating, okay, a brain that is under concentration or learning will light up in the cerebellum because the massive increase of neuroactivity and therefore also blood flow to the cerebellum, okay? You will also have some increase in your prefrontal cortex or frontal lobes that are doing some of that intellectual processing at the same time, okay? An ADHD brain, not by choice, by wiring, okay? By wiring, removes blood flow from the cerebellum when you try and concentrate. The harder an ADHD brain attempts to concentrate, the less blood flow and neuron activity goes on in the cerebellum. And therefore, often the less activity is going on in the intellectual processing because it doesn't have enough neuroactivity to get those things firing. So the harder an ADHD brain attempts to concentrate, the less blood flow goes to the area required for concentration. That is not a choice. That is a physiological wiring misfiring. Okay? So it is why ADHD has short attention spans and can consume schoolwork, for instance, in very short, simplistic terms, and then are off doing something else because they have trouble concentrating. It's not if they just tried harder, they could. I know I'm probably going to say that 1,000 times in this video, but there you go. Okay? So I need you to understand the physiological issue with ADHD. Now, for some ADHD, and ADHD unfortunately has a lot of different flavors. It's a lot like autism spectrum. It's a spectrum. ADHD can present very differently in male and female brains, let alone in teen brains as well as adult brains, okay? For some brains, like mine, okay, now this is partly from trauma, my amygdala, which is my emotion center in my brain, which is right smack between my ears, right in the middle of my brain is my emotional center, the amygdala. The less I concentrate, I know I can't concentrate and my anxiety starts to freak out. My amygdala goes on fire because I am so stressed in my perfectionism that if I can't do this right, I'm going to get hurt. Something very bad is going to happen. Verbal punishment, abuse, criticism, judgment. I'm going to get hurt if I can't do this. So I start to freak out. So my amygdala goes crazy as my cerebellum goes and can't concentrate. Now that's not true for everyone, okay? That's true for me because I also have anxiety. So I know I can't concentrate. I know my brain's not doing what it needs to. And so my anxiety starts to go through the roof, which creates other physiological responses, okay? All right. Okay, let's talk about the H part, the ADHD. As I mentioned, only 40% of those people diagnosed have the H, okay? For male, the hyperactivity is more common in their physical body. So for young boys, it presents more as the need to be moving, the need to, doesn't mean they can't sit still. It just means that they need to be active. They love the activity part. For some, it means that sitting still or sitting in a desk for long periods of time is just literally physically impossible because they need constant movement. So my kids went to a Montessori school, a public Montessori school, and so there was no desks. They were always learning via moving around the classroom when their bodies needed to. And so it worked really well for them to reduce the level of impulsivity and acting out because they were not forced to sit in a desk. For the few years where they were not in Montessori, it was not available where we moved, it was horrific. They couldn't concentrate, they struggled in school, and their experience of school went from I love school, it's fun and I love learning to I hate school, crying every morning, don't make me go, because sitting in a desk was so not what their brain, it didn't work with their brain. And then when they got back into Montessori, that child did exceedingly well again because they could move around all day whilst learning and actually learned so much better that way, okay? For the female brain, it is far more common for the female brain who has ADHD to not have the external physicality of the H, the hyperactivity, but instead, as I mentioned just prior, the H in the female brain is often internal. 40 tabs open, 60 squirrels on Red Bull. Or as I've said if you watch my Instagram stories, it's like having 1,000 fruit flies, but nobody can find the fruit. It's not fun. That is how the H, the hyperactivity part, presents in females far more often, which is why young girls are often misdiagnosed or missed altogether in the education system because they can sit still physically, yet they are more often told that they are not reaching their potential because they have troubles focusing because their brain has all the fruit flies going on in it. It's an internal thing, not an external thing. Okay? So that was the case for me, although I did need to move a lot. I was in all the sports, I was in all the PE, I needed, and I could sit still in class because I knew I was going to get that outlet later that day or like later that evening or something. So I could sit still in class relatively often, but I knew I needed that movement every day, all day. I just didn't need it in school necessarily, okay? So difference with female and male brains, and that is critical for you to understand. So let's talk about impulse control. Impulse control is already difficult for teenage because of the teenage brain development, which I've talked about in almost all of my videos. Teenage brain development and their executive function, which executive function, PS, does not finish forming the latest science until they are 28. That's right, 28. Now, does it mean that they have no impulse control until they're 28? No, it's a progressive development, okay? It's progressive development, but because the teenage brain is the second and final massive growth phase in our human lifetime, the first is as a toddler, then the second, then it kind of settles out a little as they're children, okay? And then it explodes again in their brain as a teenager. It means that this impulse control, it is why teenagers are so wired for risky behavior, okay? Because their need for novelty, self-expression, and independence is often a recipe for risk-taking behavior, and they lack impulse control on a regular teen brain. That is amplified dramatically on an ADHD brain, okay? It doesn't mean they're stupid. None of this is an IQ statement. This is impulse control, impulse regulation does not kick in until much later unless there are effective and healthy coping strategies and even supplements or medication for an ADHD teen brain, okay? So this means that their brain, the impulsivity runs with the dopamine, okay? Now, dopamine is required for things like concentration and learning. So because the ADHD brain, generally speaking, lacks the natural level of dopamine that would kick in to get their cerebellum to get more like neuroactivity, so they would have a normal level of concentration or a normal level of blood flow to the cerebellum, their dopamine is lacking. But their need for dopamine, their brain's natural, it's low, but we all need a certain level of dopamine. So impulsivity is higher, like doing stupid things is higher because they're seeking dopamine. They're dopamine seeking machines, okay? Now this can go off the rails with impulsivity, okay, relative to talking. I just was interacting with a parent the other day whose child has recently been diagnosed with ADHD, and she was like, but she won't stop talking in class. Like she's always interrupting and talking and whatever. And I'm like, yeah, that's ADHD. Hi, you're looking at her, extroverted extrovert. I'd rather do this all day long, except that I don't get paid to do this. But I love it. It's like what lights me up. Are you kidding? But you sit me in front of my laptop to do the businessy part of my business? I could stare at a screen all day and get nothing done sometimes, okay? So the impulse control can come out as constantly talking, and maybe they're an extrovert, right? Constant talking, connecting, joking. I used humor a lot. I was the class clown. I was joking all the time. That was my impulsivity not working, but it was my need for dopamine. So I would get dopamine hits when I could make people laugh or get them to engage with me because I'm an extrovert. So anything super extroverted was where I found my dopamine. Just being quiet and learning at a desk. Boring. Who wants quiet? I sure didn't. Okay. It can mean that attention seeking or acting out, which is unfortunately labeled more with young boys. That this attention seeking behavior and acting out, that is a dopamine seeking behavior. Okay. They're not bad. They're not wrong. Their brain requires dopamine, and that is its path to the dopamine. Okay? It can also come out, again, through the risk-taking behavior. So I have a lot of notes here, so I just need to keep following because otherwise I don't know where we will end up. Vaping, like smoking pot, phone addiction, internet addiction. ADHD brains are more susceptible to addictive behaviors because that addiction is dopamine. And their brain is naturally low on dopamine, so they're seeking dopamine. And, oh, surprise, smartphones, social media, internet gaming, all of that are built to give the brain dopamine. So is your teenager irresponsible, lazy, or lacking maturity? Hails to the no. Their brain is simply getting what it naturally doesn't have from a device with software written by whose generation? Ours. Intended to feed their brains dopamine. So before you go judging about morally judgy, let's look at how their brain is pathologically, physiologically wiring and firing, its lack of dopamine, and what they are using to simply get the dopamine it needs. Our brains need dopamine. It is necessary for the functioning of our brain. Their brains don't naturally have it, perhaps the way that yours do. Yours does, okay? So they're simply seeking it. That also means porn. Okay, porn is also dopamine. Yes, there's a lot of negative impacts to porn, but I just want to be really clear. These are dopamine-seeking things. Porn, sex, also using social media for sexual attention, like messaging, putting a public account and putting like revealing or very sexually provocative photos for the purpose of attention. That's dopamine, okay? Drinking a lot of alcohol. Food can be an addiction. I personally was almost all of those things. I was an ADHD brain times 1,000, of which my parents did not know. So instead, what I got was a whole lot of criticism, ridicule, grounding, punishment, more criticism, more verbal abuse, name calling, more punishment and more grounding, because they did not know that I had ADHD, and they most certainly were not equipped to parent through it. Okay? So I was highly promiscuous. I was an extroverted extrovert seeking dopamine. That's not a recipe for anything good, I'm going to tell you right now. I was needing that attention. I had a love language of physical touch and words of affirmation, and I got zero, not even a hug, zero of that at home. So where do you think I went and sought it? Well, at the time, heterosexual relationships was the way to go do that. So it started very young, seeking that dopamine of physical touch and words of anything for words of affirmation. So that's why I got really good at humor. I got really good at, now I was not like super saucy in my dressing and everything, because basically I looked like a boy till I was about 14-ish, because I was flat as a board, didn't develop, and had really short hair. So the physical part did not work for me so much, but I still I learned to work it in order to get that dopamine and that attention. Drinking, I started drinking heavily 2 weeks into grade 8. I was 13 years old, because drinking was a way, because I have the H on the inside, the hyperactivity on the inside, drinking was a way to stop all the 1,000 voices going on in there at one time. So it lowered that, but it also lowered all inhibition. And if I go back to impulse control, I had none. Yeah, basically I had none. So I was highly impulsive with drinking. I was highly impulsive with any decision making that my brain said, ooh, that's dopamine. Yeah, let's go do that. Dangerous, risky, we'll be fine. Let's go do that. And I was smart enough, I was a gifted student, I was smart enough to really weigh out the risks. Now, does that mean I didn't do risky, stupid shit? Totally I did. But I want you to understand, it didn't make me a bad person, okay? It made me an undiagnosed ADHD brain on top of being a teen brain. Okay, continuing through. Also, did you know that teen pregnancy, if you go into care homes or facilities that specifically support young pregnant women, pregnant females, okay, that either them or the biological father of that child, there is a 40% higher chance that that young girl or the father of that child has ADHD. Did you know that? Teen pregnancy is significantly higher in children with ADHD. It's lack of impulse control, okay? Impulse regulation, not there. they're chasing the dopamine and what feels good. Okay. So teenagers are already, the teen brain is already all gas pedal and no brakes. That is a function of their developing brain. Okay. That their executive function, the brakes are just really low because it is developing both the hardware, like all new hardware, it's actually growing for reals. Their brain is actually growing. It is densifying, but it's also, that part doesn't take as long. They're also writing all new software to run this more complex hardware. So they need more complex software. The software is what doesn't finish developing until they're about 28. Okay. So although teenagers are all gas pedal and no brakes, ADHD is like the gas pedal is pinned to the floor. Go faster. Go faster, go harder, more, because their brain is seeking dopamine. Okay. Which doesn't naturally occur at a high enough level in their brain to give them the normal arousal, dopamine arousal, doing normal, regular, also stupid teenager things. Okay. So they have a lack of ability. Okay, so let's talk about this. Dopamine. So dopamine is required for concentration. Okay? In order to concentrate, in order to get the cerebellum to work, to get the neurons all firing, your brain requires dopamine. Okay? ADHD brains do not naturally have a high enough level of dopamine. So what is effective stimulation for a regular brain to concentrate is not enough level of stimulation to get the ADHD brain to concentrate. So not only do they struggle with concentration, okay, that's different, they also struggle with being inattentive. That is also focus, which is different than concentration, okay? Focus and concentration are not the same thing. The ability to focus for any length of time on one specific task, the ADHD brain struggles with that level of focus. Because what ADHD actually is, it is not attention deficit. It is an inattentive deficit, okay? So I struggle to not interact with the constant stimulus in my environment. So like this morning, Kate getting ready for this video, I was all over the friggin' map because the minute a thought comes into my brain, it wants to drive the bus just as much as I was working on my phone, just as much as, oh, look, I'm looking at this. I should drink the rest of this like right now. And oh, my pen is sitting there. Did I have anything else to write? Like it's constant. So notifications on a phone. So if I'm sitting in a classroom, okay, I'm sitting in a classroom and a bird flies by the window. My brain wants to equally focus on that visual stimulus of a bird flying by the window as much as it does as the teacher is talking, as much as it does as someone is tapping their pen on the desk, as much as it does, what is that paper in front of me and what am I supposed to do with it? And then someone's phone notification is going off. They're all weighted the same in an ADHD brain. They're all weighted the same. So the inability to focus means that the ADHD brain struggles to not constantly interact with every piece of stimulus in their environment. Does that make sense? It is why I personally do not have notifications turned on my phone. The only notification on my phone is texting, and I never have the volume on. I never have any audible alerts on my phone because God forbid if that happened, well, we wouldn't be sitting here right now and I don't know what else would happen. Okay. So, they struggle to stop interacting with constant environmental cues. Okay. They've proven this. It's actually not an inability to focus. It's an inability to filter out constant environmental cues and stimulus, okay? Now, here's another fun fact. ADHD is hereditary. It is. ADHD is now actually being touted as one of the most highly hereditary disorders known. One of them. In my research, there are two different statistics that I have, so I will give them both to you. One is from Dr. Russell Barkley. It is that there is at least a 50% chance that one of the two biological parents of the child now diagnosed with ADHD, at least one of them also has ADHD, which does coincide with the second piece of research that I have, which is a little more specific, but would fall under that 50%. That 25% of mothers of children diagnosed with ADHD also have ADHD. 25% of mothers. So I'm one of them. Hi, I'm Allie, and I have ADHD, and my son has ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. Okay, that I've also heard, this is from researchers I follow, that 7% of dads are more likely to also have ADHD if their child has been diagnosed with ADHD. It is why clinicians are now being told, if you have a child sitting in front of you who's being diagnosed with ADHD, you are not done your work, because one of those two parents probably has ADHD, and unless they understand it and they understand how it presents in themselves, they are not going to be able to effectively parent that child who's now been diagnosed with ADHD, because they also won't understand their brain. Okay? Okay. Another piece of data that I just heard, I'm not sure how much I agree with this, but it's a piece of data also from Dr. Russell Barkley, whose videos you've probably seen snippets around TikTok, etc., is that the ADHD brain operates at roughly 30% of emotional chronological age. Okay? So, if you have a 10-year-old, their emotional capacity, emotional maturity is going to be approximately 6.5. Okay? If you have a 20-year-old, their emotional capacity, maturity level is going to be approximately 14. Those are approximate ages. Okay? The reason I'm saying that is because you can support through really intentional parenting your ADHD child to have emotional intelligence and emotional awareness that I believe, this is my own personal experience with my own children, to have emotional maturity levels I believe that are higher than that. Not, their emotional level will not achieve their chronological age. That is statistically proven. It is not going to achieve it. I am close to 52, and my emotional age, well, I don't know, inside I feel like I'm 16 most days, but yeah, I'm probably more like 35. No medical, anyway, whatever. So just be aware of that. Okay, be aware of that. So if you have a 14-year-old who has ADHD, particularly males, for males, this really hits them a lot harder. And I don't think it's fair. It just is science. If you have a 14-year-old male, they are going to have an emotional maturity age of approximately 9 or 10. And treating them with condemnation or condescension because they are failing expectations and they are just less than, is like asking a 3-legged dog to win a 4-legged race. So when you can get that 3-legged dog to win the 4-legged race, then you might be able to ask your ADHD 14-year-old son to act their age. I am deeply passionate about this. Having grown up in a home, I have ADHD, with parents who did not know that and were never equipped to parent my ADHD brain, and being consistently, daily ridiculed, criticized, and condemned because of the way my brain operated relative to how they wanted my brain to operate. It is unfair, and it will make things worse. All of my content is based on raising an ADHD child with a parent of ADHD. All of my programs, all of it. It's all ADHD informed, which therapists have given their stamp of approval on. It's also trauma informed. Okay? All right, moving on. Let's talk about how do you set boundaries with an impulsive child? How do you set boundaries then with an ADHD child? Okay, so this is snippets of a conversation that I had on Monday, actually, with a gorgeous mama whose youngest child has ADHD. He's 10 years old chronologically right now. She is a mental health professional, okay? So this woman is highly skilled and does not have ADHD herself, so far as we know, yet her youngest son does. So what worked for her older son is not working for her younger son. Not surprising. That's also very normal with ADHD. This mama is one of the most patient. She's more patient than me, let's put it that way, okay? And does clearly understand what a boundary is, what it's not, understands connection over control, understands the repetition required, the mind-numbing repetition required for a teenage brain to learn anything. And yet that's not working with her son either. So let's talk about boundaries and impulsivity with an ADHD brain. Okay, so the number one thing you need to understand when you are raising an ADHD brain, use less words. Use less words. There is no amount of re-explaining, over-explaining that is going to reach the ADHD brain. I could not pay attention in university because I couldn't listen to a lecture for more than about 15 minutes. And my professors used to throw chalk at me to get me to wake up and be like, Allie, what were you just thinking? And I was like, about grocery shopping and the laundry I have to do later. Because I just can't intake verbal instructions that way. I'm not verbal that way. Okay? Now this is different for every brain. However, it is a proven fact. ADHD, use less words. Okay? You've got to be clear, concise, and very, very brief. And if you need to practice by writing it out on a recipe card or a cue card until you get it from 100 words down to 25, then do that. Okay? Just keep crossing out unnecessary words till you get it right down to the nuts and bolts. ADHD cannot intake more information. So I talked to a mom once who used to pick up her 14, 15-year-old son from school. And then because they were trapped in the car, she would use that time to go over his task list for the day. Shocking, he didn't get it done. I said, because he's overstimulated from a whole day at school as a teen brain. And now you are inundating him with a task list. He's not hearing anything you have to say. None of it. Okay, so don't bother. It's too many words and at the wrong time. He needs to decompress first. ADHD uses visual cues better. And if it's something your teenager can create as the visual cue, that's even better because you'll get ownership. So here's an example. Some children work better with visuals, some don't. Okay, I'm giving you generalizations. So this mama I talked to on Monday, her son, there's areas in the house he's allowed to kick a ball. Okay, and there's areas he's not. Shockingly, impulse regulation, he continues to use it in an area where he's not allowed to use it. I said, okay, what if your son at 10 years old made visual signs of like the soccer ball, just draw the soccer ball and then put one like a red X through it or something and make that sign and put it up in the places where the ball isn't allowed and then make the soccer ball and like put a green circle around it where the soccer ball is allowed. Because he is not bad. He is not being defiant. He is trying to regulate his body because ADHD also struggles with emotional regulation, thus impulsivity. Okay? So what he's trying to do is their dopamine kind of is like all over the map. And so his dopamine or his like adrenaline and nervous system isn't regulated. So he starts kicking the ball because that's what he needs to do to regulate So the verbal boundary of you can kick the ball here, but you can't kick the ball here, it's too specific. His brain doesn't give a crap. His brain just needs the outlet. So use visual cues to say to him, you know, okay, I see that you want to kick that ball. Where is the best place to do that? Don't say, I told you not to kick the ball in there. We can't kick the ball in there, and then punish and then consequence. Oh my gosh. Nope. I see that you want to kick the ball. I'm seeing you need to do this. Where's the best place to do that? Then what you're doing is getting his executive function to kick in, to go and look for the signs. You're like, yeah, visual cue. He's like, oh, over here. And you're like, yes, you go kick that ball. Off you go, slugger. Now, I understand that might work better for a younger child than a teenager, but you can still use visual cues for the teenager, because the constant nagging and reminding, also not working. All your teenager hears, especially with an ADHD brain, is you're stupid, you forgot again, you're unreliable, and I can't count on you. Now, I understand as a parent, as an adult, you might be thinking that. I get it. I was constantly told that I was stupid, I was unreliable, I couldn't remember anything. I could remember but you'll only remember what's important to you. Because my brain was driving for dopamine. My brain was driving for the dopamine. So I would remember what was important to me because it would increase my dopamine, because I was dopamine seeking, okay? But when I was asked to do a certain task, I would forget because it didn't stimulate my dopamine enough, okay? So constantly nagging and reminding is not helping, even if I agree your teenager is unreliable and forgetful. I get it. It is so frustrating. I totally understand, okay? But what needs to happen more importantly is to help your teenager build their own cues that work for them. And is it going to take a lot more patience? Yes. Is it going to take a lot more curiosity and compassion? Yes. Yes, it will. Okay? Teenagers, young children especially, they need a physical release on a regular basis, which is often written into a 504 or some kind of adaptation or accommodations for ADHD children in schools, is that they need regular physical releases, like about every 20 minutes. They need to release that energy because their brain gets overstimulated very quickly, and then it becomes emotional energy that they don't know how to get out. And for girls, remember, it's more common that then their brain gets really busy and then they can't concentrate, but you won't see it. So for some children, and let them lead. Some children, it's actually not a physical outlet. Like I just heard the other day about how one child was forced to go do jumping jacks every 20 minutes. And he's like, they're so cruel. I don't want to do jumping jacks. Well, then stop forcing it on the kid. That's dumb. Guess what he said? The child said, building body and brain awareness. I just want to go sit quietly. If he can regulate, or she, I don't care. If the child can self-regulate quietly in a corner, then that's what they need. We're not trying to tell the child that they don't know their body awareness. We're trying to build body awareness, working with the physiology of their brain. So sometimes they need more quiet space. Sometimes they need to go and read, although reading is nearly impossible for ADHD. Like I felt so much shame for so many years of my life that I couldn't learn. And then the era of technology hit, where there are audiobooks now available, and it changed everything for me. I'm a ferocious learner. I'm just not a reader. I can't read. I can't focus on a page. But I can learn ferociously. Yes, and I need to see. I'm a visual person. Do not try explaining my taxes to me or numbers to me in a conversation, because I'm out after 30 seconds. You better have color-coded, really simplistic charts and numbers to show me in a simplistic form, and then I'm in. I'm 100% I'm in. I'm smart. But I do not take in information through more words. So ADHD children need support to regulate They need to regulate first before you can reason. So if your child busts through a boundary again, because they're going to, and then you sit down and you're trying to reason with them, waste of time for both of you. First, you need to get to the teenager and say, like, what was your brain and body telling you? And this is what I go through in all of my programs, how to have curious, compassionate conversations to build brain-body awareness. What was the impulse? Because teenagers are full of them. What was the impulse? What was your brain and body wanting? What was the itch that you were trying to scratch? Yeah, I could see how you could do that. Totally. Yes, you'd want to. Okay. So then that rolled out into this decision, right? This decision. And then this decision rolled out. That's adult level reasoning, my friends. That's not teenager level reasoning. You have to slowly walk them through this, particularly ADHD. Then you have to say to them, okay, if you have that itch next time, don't make that choice next time. That's 5 steps down the road, my friends. They're not there. They're back at the itch. They're trying to scratch, okay? So if they're trying to scratch that itch, then you're like, okay, if you have that itch next time, what's something you can do to get that met? So if I had parents who were better equipped to parent me, I might have had a lot more positive physical affection at home and might have needed a lot less of it externally. And if I still was promiscuous, then it would have been, who are the safe people that you can go get hugs and physical attention from who aren't going to want to use your body for their pleasure? That would have been a hard conversation, but a really important one for me. Oh, okay, I can go to these people and say, I need touch right now. And they could like hug me. And by the way, doing this, rubbing the back of your arms, is actually a nervous system calmer. It calms the dorsal vagal nerve. And if you're a physical touch person, it's very healing. Okay. So who are safe people so that I would stay safe, right? What are situations that people are going to misinterpret, not by any fault of my own? That's a whole other misogynistic patriarch conversation we are not going to have right now. Who are people that I know that I say, I need some affirmation right now? I'm feeling really low. I need some affirmation right now. And they would give me positive words of affirmation so that I wouldn't need to be the class clown or class ass to go and seek that constant validation and affirmation. I got 0 of it at home. 0. Who were teachers who would give that to me? Who were school counselors who could give that to me? Who were friends? It's helping your teenager, to not stop the itch. It's knowing how to effectively scratch the itch. And you do not do that through reasoning. You are helping their brain to regulate first, then you can relate to them through empathy and validation, and only then can you reason, and you better keep it short and brief. Okay? Yes, there's absolutely different levels of the HD. And as I said in the very beginning of this video, if you watch it, the H is more externally displayed by males. It is hyperactively physically. They need to be moving more. For female brains, it is internal, which shows up a lot as lack of focus or anxiety because it is running around like 1,000 fruit flies in there. I have a little bit of both. Okay, so... all right, I hope this has been helpful to you to better understand your teenagers' impulsivity and lack of attention to your boundaries, the inherent extra level of patience required to raise an ADHD child, that this is not a functional choice for them to consistently act out or defy your boundaries, so get over it. This is a function of the pathology of their brain, and getting them, number one, an effective assessment. Get an effective assessment. And I know as an adult, as a parent, you are already so overstressed and overtaxed by what is going on. 100% I get that. Get an effective assessment. Number two, drive with either a naturopath, a functional medicine doctor, not necessarily a doctor who are not that excessively trained in the brain. Get effective supplementation or medical intervention as necessary. I'm not saying everyone needs to be medicated. I personally take very high levels, recommended by a psychiatrist, of natural supplements, which no, I'm not going to talk about here because I am not licensed to refer anybody to any of that work for me. They were life-changing for me, both to increase my level of dopamine so that I can wake up and I can focus for longer periods of time, and it lowers my anxiety so that I have a better balance. The majority of ADHD medication, or doctors who do not understand the brain, will instantly begin to prescribe medication that calms the emotional brain as some messed up way to stop the impulsivity to cure ADHD. It is 100% disproven that does not and will not work. All that does is has teenagers say, I feel numb, I don't feel like myself, I don't want to take this medication, and so they stop taking it and they stop believing that that is that's the answer. You do not support ADHD by calming the emotional brain. No, they need a specific level of stimulant, but that isn't too much stimulant in order to get the dopamine to naturally increase. Okay? So you must get an effective diagnosis. You must seek naturopathic, whatever you can, to get the right balance in their brain. An unbalanced brain is not your child's fault. An unbalanced brain is not need for greater consequences or punishment. And an unbalanced brain, less understood, will create more disconnection and more emotional trauma for your child than what you are willing to bank on. I'm willing to promise you. Get them a balanced brain to as best as your ability. You will need to continue to advocate to get that, because unfortunately in our world right now, it is not easy to do. There are still so many constant misunderstandings, okay? The last thing I want to say is this. ADHD brains are obsessive because they are chasing dopamine. ADHD brains are also documented as some of the most creative and some of the most hyper-focused when they find something that juices them up. Okay? So ADHD might not be able to learn in a traditional environment, but they might be building world-class creative environments in creative Minecraft and things never anybody even thought of, and all this code and all these, or Lego, and they can't get enough of the obsession of that, or food, baking, anything, because their brain's chasing dopamine, and their brain is often highly hyper-focused on things that they get that pleasure center from. That also doesn't make them wrong or bad or weak. Sometimes those things are healthy. I used exercise, sports. Those were my dopamine fixes. Those are healthy to a degree. Okay? So just because your teen is hyper-focused on something else, don't miss the gift in that, but be consequencing and punishing or criticizing them because they can't perform in school in a very square, linear box that is not suited for an ADHD brain. Be willing to think outside the box. Please stop seeing this as a constant choice and become your teenager's ally in ADHD rather than being the enemy, because this education and information is just not being spread enough. If you have found this helpful, I would love if you would share, hit the follow, hit the subscribe on YouTube. I will be posting this immediately. Thank you so much for joining me. If you want more on this, I have a free masterclass you can access by tapping the link in my profile here on Instagram. I'll put it in the comments on YouTube. Again, I am an ADHD parent who has parented an ADHD child, so all of my information will follow that for you if you're looking for specific ways to better support your teen. That's the best way to start, okay? All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining me. I will be here again next week talking about all things parenting teens. Bye, everybody.